everyone. I am Dr. Kanika, Assistant Professor in ID Department, IMS Noida. So today we are going to discuss this exception handling in Java. So from the exam point of view and from the interview point of view, it is very important topic in Java where we know about how to handle exceptions, types of exceptions, and what is exception handling, how JVM will handle. So all these topics we will cover in this video. So let's start the video. This is the table of contents like introduction, difference between error and exceptions, hierarchy of exceptions, types of exceptions, exception handling, and advantages of exception handling. So these are the topics which we are going to cover. So let's start with the introduction. What is exception? Exception, like what is the Hindi meaning of exception? It's different, right? So exception is nothing. It is, if we talk in a very layman, very common language, means the exception is that thing which disturbs a flow of a normal thing. If suppose we are going in a function and something happened, yeah, something occurred, yeah, our tire has been punctured, so that's why we can't reach at that place on time. So that event has been happened, that disturbance has been occurred. So exception is normal, is the same way which disturbs the normal flow of a program. So this is the definition. Events that occur during the execution of program that interrupt the normal flow of control, like right? Because if we are executing 1 2 3 4 5 6 and suppose exception occur at the statement of 4, then after 4 nothing will be print. So at point your exception has been occurred. So an exception or exceptional event is a problem that arises during the execution of a program, right? So when an exception occurs, the normal flow of a program is disturbed and the program application terminate abnormally, which is not recommended to. Yeah, therefore, these exceptions are to be handled. Exceptions can be occur for many different reasons. First is suppose your programmer has entered the wrong input, right? Or a file that needs to be opened cannot be found. So these can be the reasons where an exception can occur. What is the difference between error and exceptions? Like error is what? An error indicates serious problem that a reasonable application should not try to catch. There is no try and there is no catch in error. But in exception, we can handle this exception with the help of try and catch. Those finally, these are the terms where we can use to handle this. These are the basic terms of exception handling. This is very helpful to handle an exception. So exception indicates conditions that a reasonable application might try to catch. Like I said just before sometime, your exception can occur with some conditions, some situations, like programmer has entered wrong input, yeah, your file not found. So these can be the reason where exceptions can occur, but error can be occur due to the lack of the system resources, right? Before discuss the exception hierarchy, first we are going to discuss the difference between the error and exception in deep. So let's look at basic. What is the basic means? Basic definitions of error and exception. What is the difference between both the terms? So error is caused due to the lack of system resources. Means it is the error occurs just because of the system. And exceptions is caused because of the code. Means just because of the programmer's code. Programmer put something wrong in the code, so that why exception occurred. Second point is recovery. Can error be recovered? Can we recover exception? So error can't be recovered. It is irrecoverable, and the exception is recoverable because exception is caused just because of the code, but error is caused just because of the lack of system resources. So it is not the part of the program code. Next point is keywords. There is no means to handle an error by the program code. Means we can this error cannot be handled by the programmer, but except matlab there is no try and catch, right? But in exception are handled using three keywords: try, catch, and throw. Next fourth point is what is consequences. As the error is detected, the programmer will terminate abnormally. It will directly terminate. Nothing will be print. But when an exception is detected, it is thrown and caught by the throw and catch keywords correspondingly. The throw and catch keywords work here is like your police, where police have to caught the thief. So here is the throw and catch are doing the same job. Like they have to caught the exception. Fifth point is your types. Error is basically one type, which is called is unchecked type, runtime error, and exception has two types: checked or unchecked type. Package. To identify or to define an error, we have to use java.lang.error packages, and for the exceptions, we have to define java.lang.exceptions. Last is what can be the example, like there is an example out of memory and stack overflow. There can be some examples of error, because these are not in the boundary of a programmer, right? Out of memory, it is the part of the system resources. Stack overflow is also the part of system resources. And this is the example. This can be the examples of checked exceptions. Class not found. If you are creating a file, but the file is not present at that location, so what exception can be occurred? Class not found. So no such method. Unchecked exceptions, null pointer, index out of bound. So these are the examples, and these are the basic difference between error and exception. So first, just start the exception hierarchy. So this is a very important question, because sometimes examiner ask about the students, like what is the parent class of all classes in Java, right? So first of all, you have to remember this point, that object is the parent class of all the classes in Java. Okay. After that, throwable occur, because throwable is the exceptions parent class. So all exceptions and errors types are subclasses of class throwable, which is base class of hierarchy. One branch is headed by exceptions. This class is used for exceptional condition that user program should catch. Null pointer exception is an example of such an exception. There are more examples of exceptions. So we will cover. So this is a continuing part of the class hierarchy. So there is an important subclass of exception, like throwable is a parent class of exception called runtime exceptions. Okay, which occurs at the runtime. Those called are runtime exception, unchecked exceptions basically. So exceptions of this type are automatically defined for the programmers that you write, and include such things such as division by zero and invalid array indexing. Means if you are creating a arithmetic program, and you by mistake you are dividing something by 0, so it gives you the arithmetic exceptions, right? It doesn't give you it doesn't give you the it doesn't give you the error. It gives you the exception, division by 0. Or if you are creating an array program, then if your range is basically 0 to 5, and you indexing the array of 6, yeah, sorry, 7, that's it, gives you the exception invalid array indexes, right? It will never give you the error. So error which define exceptions that are not expected to be caught under normal circumstances by your program, which I already discussed in the difference between the error and exceptions, that errors are irrecoverable. There is no try and catch keywords. So errors are used by the Java runtime system to indicate errors having to do with the runtime environment itself, means the JRE concept. Stack Overflow error is an example of such an error. We will discuss in the types of exceptions. So this is basically the exception class hierarchy. You can see the object is the parent class of throwable, and throwable, it is the parent class of exception and error. And exception, there are so many exceptions, we will discuss further. And runtime exceptions, runtime has two types: index outbounds, null pointer exception. There are just basically a simple class hierarchy to just understand the concept of the exceptions and error, right? Error too serious to catch, we cannot handle. So exception can handle, as we discussed earlier. So types of exceptions, right? Basically, Java exceptions has two types, but Oracle defined the three categories of exception. One is checked exception, second is unchecked exceptions, and the third is error. So first is checked exceptions. A checked exception is exceptions that occurs at the compile time. When you compile a program, that time it will occur. So that's why it is also called as compile time exceptions. So these exceptions cannot simply be ignored at the time of compilation, because if you when you compile a program, that time it will occur. So you cannot ignore, right? So you have to handle this situations, yeah, this type of exceptions. So checked exceptions are subject to catch or specify a requirement, which means they require catching or declaration. This requirement is optional for unchecked. Unchecked exception we will discuss after this checked exception. So here is the example. Suppose you have a program. There is a some packages, file reader. So there is a class file not found demo. Okay, you declare the main, then file, you created an object file, the object name is file, and you are giving the specific location of a particular file.txt, right? When you call this file reader, and after that you are creating one more object fr and pass your file. So what it will give you the exception, what file not found exceptions, because at that position you are in E drive, you have a file named file.txt notepad file, but in the E drive there is no file. So that exception will occur at the time of compilation of a program, and this will give you the simple exception, that file not found exception, right? So this is the example of checked exceptions, that checked exceptions has occur at the time of compilation. Clear? Next is this is the which we already discussed this thing, that all Java exceptions are checked, exceptions expect those of the error and runtime exceptions. So this is the declaration that if you use file reader class in your program to read data from a file, if the file is specified in its constructor, means where you gave the location like e drive in file.txt name. So in its constructor, file doesn't exist, then a file not found exception is occurred. So these are the method read and close that works for the file reader class close exception. So second is unchecked exception. Just like checked exceptions work at the compile time, unchecked exceptions work at the runtime. So unchecked exception is an exception that occur at the time of execution when you run a program. So that's why it is called runtime example. These are the include programming bugs, logic errors, improper use of an API. So just let's start, just see the example of unchecked exception. So this is the unchecked demo class, a public demo class. You define your main public static void main string arguments and int number. You basically what you are doing here, you are declaring a array, 1 to 4. So basically you have the 4 range of an array, but what you are doing, you are printing an array increasing size plus 1, means you declare the size 4, but you are printing the size with 5, means system.out.println num 5. So it means 0 to 4, but what is here, you have declared the array with 0 to 3, right, 4, and you are printing 5 numbers. So what it gives the exception at the time when you run a program, means simple array index out of bound exception, right? So these types of exceptions occurred only at runtime. Third is, which is Oracle defined errors. We already discussed, we already know about too much of errors, as these are not exceptions at all, but problems that arise beyond the control of the user of program, because when they occur, that it cannot be handled by a programmer. So errors are typically ignored in your code because you can rarely do anything about error, because we cannot handle with the help of code. So for example, if a stack overflow occurs, an error will arise. So they are also ignored at the time of compilation. This is the now. This is the one more example here. Suppose you have 10 statements: statement 1, statement 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So in your program there are 10 statements, but at one point at the statement 5, the exception has occurred. After, what will happen when an exception occurred? Like, what is the definition said? Exceptions disturb the normal flow of our program. So after statement 5, code will not be executed, because means statement 6 to 10 will not run. So if we perform exception handling, rest of the statement will be executed. This is why we use exception handling in Java. Means if we use the exception handling, so if exception occur at the statement 5, that it will not affect your normal flow program. So the main concept is how JVM handle an exception. You all know about the JVM, Java Virtual Machine. So whenever inside a method, if an exception has occurred, the method creates an object. What methods create an object known as exception object, right? And what it will give to the handler to JVM, means now JVM will handle. The exception object contains name and description of the exception. What it will do, what the exception object will do. The exception object contains name and description of the object, means what type of exception it is. So at current state of program where exception has occurred, everything about the exception it will handle to the JVM. Creating the exception object and handling it to the runtime system, it is called throwing an exception. Means if you are handling that exception at runtime and you are creating exception object, so this is the whole procedure known as throwing an exception, right? So there must be the list of the methods that had been called to get to the method where exceptions was occurred, and this the list of method is called call listing, where everything has been stored about the exceptions. So this is the flow of exception handling, like throws, exceptions, looking for appropriate handler who will handle this exception, forward exception, looking for appropriate handler, and catches exception throw in divide. The method is called. So this is the basically flow where we have handled the exceptions. Now, how programmer handles an exception? This is all about the JVM. The JVM is handling the exception, but how programmer handles an exception. So for the programmer, there are 5 keywords. First is try, catch, throw, and finally. With the help of these keywords, we can handle the exception, right? So programmer statement that can raise exceptions are contained within a try block. We can handle the try and catch. Try means a exception has raised, and we within the try block we ensure this. We have to ensure this thing. So if an exception occurs within the try block, it is known as thrown. Or system generated exceptions are automatically thrown by the Java runtime system, and manually throw an exception, use the keyword throw. Means what it statement is saying, if a system generated exception, if an exception which is generated by system, it is automatically thrown by the Java runtime system. But if we are manually throw an exception, use that keyword through. And any exception that is thrown out of the method must be specified as a such by a throws clause. There is a difference between throw and throws. We will discuss in the further classes. So any code that absolutely must be executed after a try block complete is put in a finally block. So whatever you are doing, try, catch, throw, after all the things has been executed in a finally block. So now we already discussed so many things about exception handling, how JVM is handle, how programmer will handle the exception. So what is the advantages of exception handling? Like first advantage is maintain the normal flow of the applications. Means suppose anything, any event which is disturb your normal flow of a program, with the help of exception handling, we can easily maintain our normal flow, normal execution of a program, right? So this is the very main advantage, that nothing, no event, no thing which can cannot disturb our program. Second is separating error handling code from. Second point is separating error handling code from regular code. Means if something happening in the main, that with the exception handling will provide that feature, that with the help of this exception handling, we can separate our code, what to do when we have means we separate the R code from main and to the ordinary code, right? So this is the Uh, this is basically the very good advantages of exception handling. Next is your third next is your third advantage, propagating errors up the call stack. Means with the help of this advantages, so many methods. Suppose call stack. If call stack, if there is a call stack, that means so many methods is available on this call stack. Suppose that one method is the only method interested in an error that might occurs within real files. So this is the advantages which provide the ability to propagate error reporting up the call stacks of method. So with the help of call stack, we can propagating the error. Next is grouping and differentiating error types. This is basically your last advantages in this. So what it is doing, it is grouping, means it is collecting, and after that it is differentiate the errors, what type of errors occur, what is the exceptions. So because of the exceptions shown within the programs are object, by grouping the categories and exceptions, so it is a natural outcome of the class hierarchy. It is basically the advantages just because of the class hierarchy. So I hope this is all about the exceptions handling, how to handle JVM. I hope this concept is clear to you. So thank you.